Miriam was not the kind of woman who made scenes. She never had been. Not when her mother forgot her birthday 3 years running. Not when her boss took her project and put his name on it. Not when the man she'd loved for 6 years said, in a room 2 doors down, with his best friend laughing beside him, that she would never leave. She was the kind of woman who absorbed things. She'd been absorbing since she was 9 years old, when she learned that making noise about your pain only meant people got tired of you faster. So she got quiet instead. She got good at quiet. She got so good at it that sometimes she forgot there was anything underneath. Damien knew that about her. That was the part she'd have to sit with longest. She met him at 25, at a function she almost didn't attend. Her colleague Neka had practically dragged her there, a corporate mixer in one of those hotels that smells like money and other people's decisions, where everyone is holding a drink they don't want just to have something to do with their hands. Miriam had been standing near the window, watching the city below and doing the mental math on how early she could leave without seeming rude, when Damien appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of water and a look on his face like he'd known her in another life. He said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She said, "I'd rather be in bed watching something terrible on TV." He laughed. Real laughter. Not the networking kind. The kind that comes up from the chest before the brain can dress it up. She thought, this person might be interesting. She was right. That was the honest part. He was interesting. He was sharp and well-read, and he had opinions that weren't just borrowed from other people. And when he focused his attention on you, you felt it like a light turned on in a room you'd been sitting in the dark. The first 3 months she spent with him were the most alive she'd felt since childhood, since before she'd learned to fold herself small. He remembered things. The way she took her coffee, the name of the author she'd mentioned once, in passing, and then found the book waiting on her pillow a week later. He showed up. Not the dramatic showing up of movies. No grand gestures. No speeches in the rain. Just there. Consistent. Warm. Present. She thought, I have been waiting for something like this my whole life. She was right about that too. The change was not a thing you could have photographed. There was no single moment where Damien became different. It was more like, have you ever been in a house so long that you stop noticing the smell? You walk in every day and it's just the smell of home. But the day you bring a friend for the first time, you see their face do the thing, just for a second, where something registers that you've stopped registering, and you understand that what you've been living in has a quality you'd edited out. That's what happened to Miriam. Slowly. So slowly that she scheduled around it before she noticed she was scheduling. She stopped mentioning her work because he got quiet in a particular way when she talked about her wins. Not angry, he wasn't an angry man, just quiet in a way that had weight. So she learned to mention smaller things, or to frame the good news as luck, as accident, as something that fell into her lap instead of something she built. She stopped making plans without checking with him first. Not because he demanded it. He didn't demand anything. He would just say things like, I was hoping we could do X, after she'd already committed to Y, and then he wouldn't say anything more, and the silence would do all the work that a demand would have done, without leaving any fingerprints. She canceled on her friends 3 times in 1 month. The 4th time she canceled, Neka said, Miri, where are you? She said, what do you mean? I'm right here. Neka looked at her for a long time. No, she said, you're not. Miriam laughed it off, filed it under people who don't understand serious relationships. Went home to Damien, who had cooked her favorite thing and put on the record she loved, and sat with her feet in his lap while they talked, and she thought, Neka doesn't know what she's talking about. Look at this. Look at how good this is. That was the 4th year. The thing about being kept is that it feels, from the inside, a lot like being loved. The mechanisms are similar. Someone thinks about you constantly. Someone structures their world around your presence. Someone gets unsettled when you're not where they expected you to be. The difference is the direction. Love asks, what do you need? Keeping asks, where did you go? But when you're standing inside it, and the walls are warm, and there's food on the table, and someone reaches for your hand in the dark, the difference is hard to feel. especially when you've spent your whole life being told, in various ways, that needing too much is the fastest way to lose people. So you tell yourself, this is care. You tell yourself, I require a lot of managing, and this is what managing looks like when it's done with love. You become grateful for your own smallness. You mistake the cage for the nest. Miriam would say, later, that she didn't blame herself for that. Not anymore. But it took 2 full years of Tuesday therapy sessions to get there. The gala was Damien's firm's big anniversary event, 32 floors up. Atlanta spread below them like a lit grid, all that hustle reduced to light, and Damien moved through the room with the specific confidence of a man who knows exactly what the room thinks of him. He had briefed her in the car on the way there. 3 names she needed to remember. 1 woman she should be especially warm to. A topic she should steer away from if it came up. She nodded and stored all of it. She was good at this by now. The dress was his suggestion. Not a demand. Never a demand. Just a casual. The black one is stunning on you, 3 days before the event. The kind of thing you can't argue with, because it comes wrapped in a compliment. The earrings were his gift. Worn because they were beautiful, and because wearing them made him happy, and because by year 6 you stopped separating those 2 reasons into different piles. She worked the room beside him, smiled at the right times, said the names correctly, found the right register for every conversation, warm with the wife, professional with the partners, deferential to the senior ones. She knew how to read a room. She'd always known how to read a room. She'd just mostly been reading rooms for someone else's benefit, since she'd stopped having opinions about which rooms she even wanted to be in. Somewhere around 10:40 she excused herself. She needed 30 seconds, just 30 seconds of not performing. She walked toward the east corridor, pulling her phone out, opening nothing in particular, just to have something to look at that didn't require a performance, and that's when she heard it. The door was not fully closed, maybe 6 inches. The gap that happens when someone forgets to check, or when someone is so certain of privacy that the thought of checking doesn't arrive. She wasn't trying to listen. That's the part she kept coming back to, in the weeks after. She wasn't even slowing down. She was walking past and the voice came through the gap, and it was his voice, low and certain, and Broderick's voice underneath it asking something she couldn't quite catch, and then Damien's answer arrived in the corridor like it had been standing there waiting for her. She'll never leave me, 4 words. She stopped walking. She doesn't know how. The chuckle that followed was the most ordinary sound she had ever heard. Not a villain's laugh, not cruel. The comfortable chuckle of a man stating a thing he believes the way you state the weather, without thought, without guilt, because it simply is. Then Broderick said something, quieter, and Damien said, Miri needs someone to organize her life. That's what I am to her. She'd fall apart alone. He said it almost fondly. The way you talk about a plant that needs a specific amount of water. The way you talk about a system you've designed and maintain. The way you talk about a beautiful, helpless thing that belongs to you. She stood in the corridor. The party noise continued from the other end of the hall. A burst of laughter. Someone's heels on marble. She stood there for 4 breaths. She counted them. Not because she was trying to calm down. She wasn't panicking. That was the strangest part. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doing any of the things that would make sense in a movie about this moment. She was just very, very still. And underneath the stillness, something was settling, like sediment. Like everything that had been suspended in the water of her was finally reaching the bottom, and she could see through the surface for the first time in years. She walked back into the party, took a glass of champagne from a passing tray, sipped it, found a cluster of people near the window, and smiled at something one of them said. She caught Damien's eye across the room and he smiled at her, that familiar, possessive, warm smile, and she smiled back. He found her 20 minutes later, and his hand went to the small of her back, the way it always did, that half-claim, half-comfort touch that she'd spent years reading as love. She let his hand rest there. She was very good at this. He'd made her very good at it. They stayed another 90 minutes. She spoke when spoken to. She laughed at the right moments. She said goodbye to all the right people. In the car on the way home, he talked about the night. Who was there, who he'd spoken to, what it might mean for a deal he was watching. She said, and really in the right places. He was in a good mood. It had been a good night. He was getting ready for another hour at the bar with a few of the partners when they got home. He told her not to wait up. He kissed her cheek. He left. She stood in the middle of the apartment for a moment after the door closed. Then she opened the wardrobe. She was not someone who had ever practiced packing light. She'd always, in her previous life, before the life that was actually Damien's life with her in it, accumulated things. Books stacked everywhere. Plants on every windowsill. Art on the walls that she'd chosen just because it made something move in her chest. The apartment had some of that, but less than she expected. When she started pulling out what was hers, truly and only hers, she found the pile smaller than she'd imagined. A lot of the things she used every day turned out, on examination, to be his things that she'd been living inside. Her grandmother's cookbook, the one with her grandmother's handwriting in the margins, specifying that the written amount of chili is never the right amount of chili. That came. A photograph from her sister's birthday. Her sister's oldest daughter had Miriam's same crooked front tooth and was mortified about it in the picture, in the way only an 11-year-old can be mortified about a tooth. Miriam loved that photograph. It had lived on the corner of the bathroom mirror for 2 years. She unpinned it, a houseplant, a squat, dark-leafed thing she'd bought herself on a Tuesday afternoon 18 months ago because she'd walked past it in a market and felt pulled toward it, and for once, she'd just done the thing without checking with anyone, without thinking about whether it matched anything. Just, I like this thing. I'm bringing it home. Damien had called it ugly, once, in a mild way. The kind of mild that means, I wish you'd just get rid of it. It was coming with her. She also took the book on her nightstand, because it was halfway through and she was not the kind of person who abandoned a book in the middle. She found the note she wanted to leave for him in about 15 minutes. She considered several drafts. She is not, by nature, a person who overstates things. She kept it simple. She wrote, I was in the corridor. You were right. I'm built better than you think. She left it on the kitchen island. She left his keys beside it, the apartment key and the car key, and the key to his office that he'd given her 2 years ago for emergencies. She didn't need emergency access to his life anymore. She drove to her sister's place in Decatur. It was just past 3 a.m. She rang the bell. There was a pause, the length of a person sitting up in bed and becoming awake, then light under the door. Then her sister Bisi opened it wearing a face that was startled on the surface, but something else underneath. Something that looked, if Miriam is honest about it, a little like, I knew this night would come. Bisi did not say anything. She just stepped back from the door and let Miriam in, and then took the houseplant from her arms because Miriam's arms were full, and set it on the kitchen table, and said, I'll put sheets on the couch. Miriam sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the houseplant sitting there in Bisi's kitchen, and for the first time all night she felt something in her chest do a complicated thing. Not grief. Not exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you've been holding your breath so long you'd stop noticing, and then you exhale, and your whole body has to recalibrate to what breathing actually feels like. She slept for 11 hours. Damien came home to the note at around 1 a.m. She knew this because her phone began. Calls, back to back, with the interval of someone who is not yet understanding what they're reading. 7 in the first hour. 10 more by morning. She sat with her phone face up on Bisi's kitchen table the next morning and watched the screen light up and didn't feel what she expected to feel. She expected to feel pulled. She expected the 6 years to show up in her body like a tide, the way love that large doesn't just disappear because you've made a decision. And it was there. She's not going to pretend it wasn't there, but it was there the way weather is there. Something passing through, something that would move. Bisi made tea and didn't ask questions, because Bisi understood that questions at this point were just a different kind of pressure, and Miriam had had enough pressure to last a decade. She just sat there and drank her tea. She didn't answer. She took 4 days. 4 days to sleep in Bisi's spare room, to walk to the market at the end of the street without a plan, to eat whatever she felt like eating at whatever hour felt right, to sit with her grandmother's cookbook and actually make a full recipe for the first time in years, because she hadn't realized until she was doing it alone that she'd been cooking for something for so long that she'd forgotten she could cook from something. From hunger, from wanting, from just feeling like it. She made jollof, ate it straight from the pot, standing in BC's kitchen at 11 p.m., the cookbook open on the counter, her grandmother's note in the margin reading, "More tomatoes, always more tomatoes." She thought, "I am going to be okay." Not as a consolation, as a fact. She called him on the 5th day. BC sat at the kitchen table, hands around a mug, not pretending she wasn't there. Damien answered before the first ring finished. His voice was controlled, but she knew his control well enough to hear what was underneath it. He was someone who had been certain of a variable, and the variable had moved, and that unsettled him at a level that had nothing to do with loving her and everything to do with the system he'd built and the position he'd occupied in it. He said, "Miri, we need to talk. Whatever you heard," she said. "I know what I heard." He went very quiet. She said, "I'm not angry." She meant it. "I think you were telling the truth. I think you've believed what you said for a long time." He started to say something. She said, "I think you were wrong, though, about what I'm built for." Silence. "I'm not going to explain it," she said. "You'll figure it out eventually." She hung up. BC raised her mug in a small toast. Miriam sat down and drank her own tea, and outside BC's window, the city was doing what cities do, which is just continuing, indifferent, loud, full of people mid-story, mid-mistake, mid-becoming, and she felt, for the first time and she couldn't remember exactly how long, like she was one of them. Mid-becoming. Pointed somewhere. The months that came after were not the months of the movies. There was no montage. There was no transformation sequence where she got a haircut and started running at sunrise and developed a new wardrobe and met someone better. What there was Tuesday mornings. Her therapist's name was Dr. Adaeze, and she had a plant in the corner of her office that Miriam thought must be fake, and was informed, on the 3rd session, was very much alive and had been in that corner for 9 years. She told Dr. Adaeze about the corridor. Dr. Adaeze said, "What did you feel, standing there?" She thought about it. "Nothing," she said. And then, because that wasn't quite right. Not nothing. Something too settled to be nothing. Like what? Like when you're doing a puzzle, and a piece that you've been jamming in the wrong space finally goes where it actually belongs. Not a great feeling. Just the correct feeling. Dr. Adaeze wrote something down. "You weren't surprised," she said. "No," Miriam said. "Tell me about that." The work was not dramatic. It did not arrive in revelations. It arrived in increments, on Tuesday mornings, in the slow and tedious and necessary process of tracing backward. Not to blame, not to diagnose Damien or herself or anyone, but just to understand how the wiring had been arranged and what would need rewiring. She learned that she'd been confusing certainty for safety, that she'd read Damien's confidence as a kind of shelter, because she'd grown up in a home where certainty from the adults meant you were protected, and she'd transferred that equation into adulthood without checking whether it still applied. She learned that she'd been editing herself for so long that she'd started to confuse her edited self for her actual self. That the woman who checked before making plans, who framed her wins as luck, who canceled on NECA and the others, that woman was not a smaller version of her. That woman was a performance she'd been doing so consistently that she'd started to believe it was the role. She learned, slowly and with significant resistance, that needing things is not the same as being needy, that having preferences is not the same as being difficult, that wanting to be known, really known, not managed, not kept, is not a character flaw. That one took the longest. She got her own apartment that summer. It was small in ways she didn't mind and needed work in ways she found she actively enjoyed. She painted one wall in the bedroom a color that Damien would definitely have called a mistake, and that she called exactly right. She filled the windowsills with plants, not because she'd planned to, but because she kept walking past markets and feeling pulled, and she'd finally stopped talking herself out of that feeling. The ugly plant from BC's kitchen counter got a spot on the bedroom windowsill. She started cooking properly again. Not for occasions, not for company, just for herself, on a Wednesday evening, because she was hungry and she had good tomatoes, and her grandmother's handwriting was right there in the margin of the cookbook saying more, always more. She called Neka. Neka picked up on the first ring and said, "I thought you might be dead." Miriam laughed until her stomach hurt. They had dinner that week, and then the week after, and then it was just a thing they did, Miriam and Neka, and a rotating cast of women who had their own complicated histories, and their own Tuesday mornings, and their own volumes of life they'd pared down to minimum viable unit sentences to survive. Miriam felt, in those dinners, something she'd been missing so long she'd stopped naming it. Witnessed, not managed, not organized, not confirmed in her own smallness. Seen. She ran into Broderick, of all people, at a coffee place in her neighborhood about 8 months later. He saw her first. She could tell by the way he did the small thing people do when they want to decide quickly whether they can get away with not making eye contact. He couldn't. She'd already looked up. He crossed the room and asked how she was, because that's what you do, even when both of you know that the question carries more freight than it usually does. She said, "Good. Really good, actually." He nodded. She watched him trying to find what to do with his face. He said, "Miriam, and then stopped, started again. "That night, I didn't mean—" "Broderick," she said, "you don't have to." He looked relieved and ashamed of his relief in equal measure. "I know what happened," she said. "I'm not angry about it. And then, because she wanted him to hear something true, you actually did me a favor." He stared at her. "I had stopped seeing myself clearly," she said. "That night gave me something to see clearly from." She got her coffee. She said goodbye. She walked back out into her neighborhood, which was loud and warm and smelled like diesel and roasting corn from the cart on the corner, and she put her headphones in and started walking, and she felt, in her chest, the specific sensation of space. Not emptiness, space, the kind that's full of air, the kind that's room for things. A year on, her sister threw her a birthday dinner, small, 7 people, Bissy's apartment, which is what you'd get if someone with strong opinions about color and no budget worked on a place for 5 years and refused to compromise on anything that mattered. Miriam wore a dress she'd bought for herself, from a market, on a Saturday morning when she had nowhere to be and no one to check with. It was not the kind of dress anyone would have selected for her. It was her own taste, which she was still learning, which turned out to be bolder than she'd thought, and softer in unexpected places. She sat at the table she'd been sitting at for the last year, and she looked at the women around it. Bissy, Neka, 3 others, and one woman she'd only met twice but who made her laugh so hard her face hurt. And she thought about something Dr. Adeze had said to her, once, on a Tuesday. Who would you be if you'd never learned to make yourself smaller? She'd thought about that question for 6 months. She still didn't have a complete answer, but she had more of one than she'd had before, and she suspected she'd have more still in another 6 months, and she'd stopped expecting the answer to arrive fully formed, all at once, like a solution. She thought it would keep arriving. In Tuesday mornings, in roasted tomatoes, in a plant on a windowsill that someone once called ugly, in walking into a room and not already knowing which version of herself she was going to be for the people in it. She would not tell you that she hated Damien. That's the part people want the most. They want the clean story, the villain confirmed, the righteous anger that feels like a fist in the air. She understood him. That was the honest version. She understood that he had learned, somewhere before her, that certainty was a form of protection, that if you named the dynamic before someone else could, you controlled it, that if you built your world carefully enough, with the right arrangements in the right positions, nothing could surprise you. She understood that he had not been wrong about her, exactly. She had not known how to leave. She had not known how to be alone. She had not known what she was made of, measured without his measurement. He'd said it like a verdict. It had turned out to be a starting point. What she would tell you, if you asked her directly, not in the story version, not in the version with a shape and a structure and a corridor and a note, but in the real version, in the Tuesday morning version, in the kitchen at midnight with more tomatoes version, is this: you can spend a very long time somewhere warm and still be cold. You can be seen every single day by someone who does not actually see you, and the thing you mistake for being known is just being kept track of. There is a difference. It took her 6 years and a 6-inch gap in a door to feel it. But she felt it. That's the part she keeps coming back to. She felt it. She stood in a corridor in a party dress with a glass of champagne she didn't want, and heard herself described in 4 words, and the 4 words were wrong. But more than wrong, they were complete. They were everything he'd needed her to be for the thing to work, and she looked at the shape of it from the outside and thought, not me, not me, not what I'm made of, not what I'm capable of, not where this ends. She was gone by morning. She took the plant. She's still watering it.